Welcome to the Conversations with Christians Engaged podcast. I'm your host, Bunny Pounds, the president of Christians Engaged. This ministry exists to awaken, motivate, educate, and empower ordinary believers in Jesus Christ to do three things: to pray for our elected officials and our nation regularly, to vote in every election to impact our culture, and to engage in some form of civic education or involvement for the well-being of our nation.
I'm so thankful, Bunny, for what you do. A lot of people talk the talk, but you really walk the walk.
There's nobody else I want to talk to about Jesus with than you.
And I will stand and lock arms with this woman of God, Bunny Pounds, any day of the week.
Bunny, you are a new hero of mine.
And I'm 100% behind something that Bunny Pounds is doing. Encourage her, pray for her, and be involved. Be part of Christians actively engaged.
America is worth it. Now is the time. America needs your involvement. Please take our pledge to pray, vote, and engage. Join with a movement of other Christians that are doing these three simple things that can really impact this nation. Join us. Hey guys, we are here for another week. Conversations with Christians Engaged. I love this. Every week we have conversations with elected officials, with activists, with ministry leaders. It is just so fun. And we're starting a new series on history informing the present. Why is history so important? Why should we be studiers of history? Why should we know American history, world history? Man, our kids are not learning history. We need to understand history so that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past and that we can really inform our present. That's why this is so important. Well, today I'm joined with Joseph Backholm from Family Research Council. He's a senior fellow at Family Research Council. We love Family Research Council. Such a great opportunity to see you, Joseph. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you, Bunny. Good to be with you.
Well, I'm so excited to have you, and you're going to be a part of our biblical worldview class that we're putting out this spring as well, and we're just honored to have you on that curriculum. Let's talk about history. I know you love history. You are one that have studied biblical worldview, the Bible, theology, history, American history. Why is it important for us to study history? Let's just dive into it. Why is this important? It seems like a very dry subject, right? I don't know. I liked it in high school.
Depends on who your teacher is, I suppose. No, but I think the thing that makes history interesting and also important is that it is a window into human nature and to human tendencies. And, you know, worldview is kind of the lane that I spend a lot of my time in. And that's really kind of the attempt to understand how ideas affect what happens in people's lives. And history is the ability to go back and answer that question. That if someone does X, what is the likely result going to be Y? And what if a whole bunch of people do X? Do they all experience Y? Yeah. And sometimes the answer to that is yes, and sometimes the answer to that is no. And if not, maybe we'll understand what the intervening factors are. But for those of us who presumably want to avoid a future of pain and misery and suffering for ourselves and our families and our community, we can go back and kind of look at other people's story. My dad said it to me this way. He said, a smart man learns from his mistakes. A wise man learns from the mistakes of others. And that's what history allows you to do, is, you know, accelerate the learning curve a little bit and say, well, that looked miserable. I'm going to try to avoid that. But if you don't study history, you don't have an idea of the connection between cause and effect of those terrible things that happened in the 20th century. Why did they happen? Let's understand that so we don't repeat those same mistakes. And we've seen it very recently, you know, in the celebration of organizations like Hamas. Like, did we not study anything about 20th century history? This is not even going back very far. But suddenly we are celebrating people who hate Jews just because we have labeled them as oppressors. And that's a whole conversation in itself. But that's what I think that's why history matters. It's because it provides us the opportunity to avoid a lot of pain if we just understand the path that other people have walked.
Well, we just got through a series on loving books in February, and I released my book, Jesus in Politics. Yay! But we just lamented how we're really not reading anymore, right? We're just not really looking for the knowledge in the right places sometimes. And, the thing about history is, like you said, I love that. I love reading biographies. I love reading about leaders, right? And influential people and the decisions that they made, because we can see so much in that we hopefully don't have to repeat. Right. That's part of my kind of diving in to books, is that trying to find wisdom, right?
Yeah, and I think to your point about why people don't read, is interesting that the things that people did for pleasure 200 years ago, we now consider to be work. And learning is one of those things. And people in their free time would grab a book, and that was the way they entertained themselves. We have so many other competing forms of entertainment, most of which do not help our mental faculties. They're destroying our ability to learn things and destroying our attention spans and all of those things. But the appeal of comfort and the easier access of kind of lazy entertainment is discouraging people from reading, and by virtue of being discouraged from reading, we're discouraged from thinking. And so amusement is literally no thought. That's what that is. And we are turning our brains off very intentionally for extended periods of time, so that a device can take over that, and that really doesn't do us many favors mentally. So restoring the love of learning and reading just requires us to see it as valuable.
Yes. Well, how do we use the Bible and the light of the Bible to then interpret history? I love to think about the Bible being the story of God, right? From Genesis to Revelation is this thread of the redemption of the Messiah for fallen humanity, all the way through the book of Revelation, where every tribe and tongue are worshiping before the throne, right? How much value should we place on the Bible interpreting our history? We can see so much through understanding biblical values and then pushing it into our history.
Yeah, Scripture tells us what is ultimately true about ourselves, about our own nature, about God, about the things that will lead to human flourishing and the things that will not lead to human flourishing. And really what Scripture allows us to do is understand the facts as we observe them. Why doesn't Marxism produce, prosperity? Why don't the kindergarten rules of everybody just share everything? Why does that not work?
Right.
Because in theory, it seems like it should work, which is why there's so many people who say there's nothing wrong with the idea. It hasn't been done right yet, right? These utopian concepts of it will work if just done right. Scripture answers that question because it tells us about human nature. And so it tells us about the things that are ultimately true. It's like, the same reason it feels like it should be right if we could put water in the gas tank of our car and drive around. It's cheaper and it would be much better for the environment. There's no emissions. So why on earth won't our car drive on gasoline or on water? Because it wasn't created for that, right? And so the Bible is the owner's manual for life, like our vehicle has an owner's manual, and it will explain to us why the things in history have happened the way they have happened. Because we often don't learn from those mistakes because we deny the fact that there are ultimately superintending rules of nature, of human nature, that can't be violated. We'd like to think that it's all up to our control, that there is an achievable utopia. Yeah. And that's why so many people are, believe as soon as we have enough political power to go change all the systemic oppression, all of the solutions, we'll finally find peace in utopia. Scripture tells us why that will never work, because it tells us about the human heart, where the real problems are. They're inside of us, not outside of us. So having the foundation of Scripture as our source of truth allows us to look at the stories of history and the people who have made progress and understand why that worked, and the people who made mistakes and did terrible things and understanding why those were mistakes that led to terrible results.
Well, there's the famous quote that says, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it."
Yeah.
What are we actually trying to avoid, though, Joseph? We hear that quote and we're like, oh, that sounds so good.
Yeah.
But, we're trying to avoid what? What are we afraid of?
Just look at biblical history. What happened to the nation of Israel? The whole Old Testament is basically a story of people who decided they were smarter than God and wanted to kind of go do their own thing. And then God would use pain of some form to get their attention, to remind them that they actually don't know that much and that it's in their best interest to submit to his will. And they do so for about 15 minutes, historically speaking, before they get too comfortable and then they fall back into their old habits, right?
Yeah.
What are we trying to avoid? We're trying to avoid the pain that comes from disobedience. And history is replete with examples of nations that get comfortable, become prosperous, and they
Rome.
get a big head because of it. They think they know a lot, and then they just serve themselves. And when you serve yourselves, you ultimately create a lot of pain for yourself and everyone around you. So the ultimate lesson that we should be learning from history is that we are the creature. God is the creator. When we submit to his will, then things go better for us and those we love. Yep. And there are plenty of examples of that. Nobody's lived a pain-free life because we live in a broken world. But it can certainly be better, and it can be worse depending on the decisions that we make. And so that's what history allows us to discover. And so what are we trying to learn? We're trying to see and remember what the mistakes are. And, you know, we're building our own record of how not to live life right now. This whole idea that you can be whatever gender you want, that you just need to follow your heart, that you can have sex with whoever you want as long as everybody consents and it's going to be fine. What is that leading to? It's leading to a trail of misery and tears. Yeah. We could have known that just by believing what God said, but we are in the process of just proving that what God said was true in the first place. And so hopefully future generations will look on that and say, not a good idea. And again, it's that old adage of, you know, the Victorian age, which receives a whole lot of, you know, ridicule from our modern sensibilities. But I think it was Robert Frost who said, don't tear down a fence until you understand why it was put up in the first place. And if we understood where the Victorian value system came from, what they were rebelling against was just this sexual license that led to all sorts of social harms. They realized this and said, hey guys, this is not good for us. We need to, you know, restrict our sexual desires and not behave on every single one of our sexual urges. And that's where that value system came from. And then we say, I don't know, you know, bah humbug, that's no fun. We want to do whatever we want to do. And we tore down a fence without ever understanding why it was put up in the first place. Now we are teaching future generations why that fence was put up in the first place. And assuredly, future generations will look back and say, that wasn't that smart. That led to a lot of problems. Let's do that differently.
Who's some of your historical heroes? Is there anybody that you think about and are like, man, well, I've learned a lot from that person's story or that specific situation?
You know, that's a good question. And truth be told, true confessions in this conversation is I don't consider myself to be a history buff, but I do study people. And I, you know, Winston Churchill is a great example of, you know, courage. And I honestly think a lot of Bible characters are just historical figures who learned how to trust and follow their creator. In the Christian church, and church history has lots of examples of people who, and I think of missionaries and Hudson Taylor, and I think of Brother Andrew, and, you know, smuggling Bibles.
Yes.
People, these are historical figures of people who really just, and the lesson I learned from so many of those folks and people I've known is, when you trust God is who he says he is, wonderful things will happen for you.
Yes.
And not easy things necessarily. We cannot expect and should not expect a life free from discomfort and challenges. But, you know, it depends on the moment of life, whether it's, you know, you need courage or you need patience or you need self-control. You're right, there's examples of history for all of these things where people can, the lessons that they learned and the lives that they lived and the consequences that resulted from their decisions just teach us what the better path is.
Yes. I remember when I was in high school, I was a theater buff.
Yeah.
And I was in a Christian theater, and we did The Hiding Place. Mm-hmm. And I'm in the concentration camp, right? I'm playing a concentration camp person with Corrie ten Boom, right? And I just, even before that, I'd read The Hiding Place, and I just fell in love with that story of just what Corrie and her sister Betsy and all of them survived during that period to be a righteous Gentile that took in the Jewish people. And then I'll never forget, I think it was about 8 or 10 years after working in government. I worked for a member of Congress, and the movie Amazing Grace came out, fashioned after Eric Metaxas' book on William Wilberforce. And I'll never forget sitting in that theater, that darkened theater, just crying my eyes out, because I was thinking, that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. I didn't have really a real historical hero that I could say, this person like William Wilberforce was called to know God, to go after theology, to love people, but also served in government. And that's okay. And it gave me a sense of, man, if there's people like that have gone before me or some of the members of Congress that I worked for, we can make it, right? We're going to make it. And so I think history gives us courage too. And I think that's what sometimes young people are lacking, right? Is just an understanding for where they fit in the bigger picture of life. Can you speak to that, of why history can bring color to younger generations, that what they're living is important, I guess? Yeah,
and the point that you just made reminds me of the harms of recency bias, and kind of one of the threats of the cultural moment that we're living through right now is this idea that everything that's newer is better, because everything that happened in the past was done by people who were patriarchal and white supremacists and whatever kind of modern pejorative we want to throw at them. Therefore, we have nothing to learn from any of them. And so we are literally choosing ignorance, because we are telling ourselves that we have nothing to learn from the people who came before us, because they did things that we're offended by. And that is such a harmful position to take in an American context or any other context, believing that we are the most enlightened, smartest, wisest, most benevolent, most virtuous people who have ever been born. Therefore, all we can do is teach the past why they were wrong and learn nothing from it. This is a sensibility that is awash in, especially our government school systems, is that we ridicule everybody who built anything in the past.
Well, that's the point, Joseph, is we're not teaching young people to esteem the past or to learn from it. We're actually teaching them the opposite: tear it down, destroy it.
Well,
right? We are the, the anointed
a Christian
ones.
worldview provides the balance to do both of those. We don't have to engage in hero worship to recognize that people who came before us did amazing things while also being imperfect people, right? The gospel answers that question. We're all fallen, we're all sinful, we're capable of great things while also capable, because of our depravity, of terrible things. So the Christian mind can objectively look at history and say, that was amazing because it aligns with Scripture. That was terrible because they didn't submit to Scripture, and look how that caused all these negative consequences. So we don't have to whitewash history. We don't have to deny that people in the past did things that are wrong, but we also have our mind open to the fact that just because we were born more recently doesn't mean we're smarter than them. And in fact, there are things we probably can and should learn from them. And so but that's not the position that the culture is encouraging us to take. They'll say, here's a mistake they made, therefore everything about their life should be rejected. We have nothing to learn from them. And that is the height of arrogance. Oh, you're getting me going now. So thinking through what makes us different as Christians is that we are living in the present, but we are reflecting continually on the past and the future, right? So we're looking at our life in the light of Adam and Eve, right? The fall, the Messiah coming, Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection. And we are looking forward to the blessed hope of the second coming of the Lord. So in that context, what happens is that we have strength and stability as we reflect on our past, and we look forward to the future. Where those that don't have a biblical worldview and don't have that sense of history and really the future don't have that hope. Can you talk about that just for a second?
Well, and what you're touching on is the way our worldview affects the way we understand history.
Yes.
Because if you assume that our lives are without purpose and meaning, that we weren't created by anyone, and we determine what is true based on our feelings or our whatever factors we want to use to determine what is true. And we're not accountable to anybody because there's no one to be accountable to.
Yeah.
And therefore, under that framework, because we're not born sinful, because sin isn't even a thing, that's just kind of a social construct that people have created to try to control other people. So there's nothing wrong with me. I was born right the first time. So the problems in the world are not inside of me. They are external to me. They are the societal injustices that have been created. And as soon as I go fix those, then everything is going to be fine. And I ultimately have placed my hope in the utopia that I'm going to create in this life. Once me and my friends get enough political power and we fix all the systemic injustice that we know is the root of the problem. That is a view of history based on an assumption about where we came from.
That's so
that we
good.
came from nothing. There's nothing inherently wrong with us. As soon as we fix the systems, then everything is fine. And there's a lot of people who are working through history and understanding history through that framework. However, if you have a Christian worldview, it's a very different understanding of the facts that we are living within. God created us.
Yes.
Sin caused the problem. Jesus came to fix the problem in redemption. And our hope is not ultimately in the political solutions that we're going to create right now, because we have low expectations for what we can do there, right? Our hope is in the new heaven and new earth when Jesus comes and fixes all the problems.
Yeah.
And so those different worldviews look at history, both, they look at the present, they look at the past, and what the future will be in very, very different ways, all based on what we assume about the nature of the reality that we live in. So that is in part why, why Christians and non-Christians just operate differently in the political space and why our expectations are different.
Well, and we're all about encouraging Christians, right? Our whole motto is pray, vote, and engage.
Right.
We believe in the engagement of the church. We believe that Christians should be salt and light in our culture, but ultimately our hope is not in the end in that. It is in that God is going to make all things right. But the beauty of understanding history is that we can see the life of the saints that have gone before us and to see what impact they've made, and that should give us hope and courage for the future.
Yeah, and history teaches us what happens when the church really does live and pray, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Yeah.
We lament the fact that things are not better than they are. Yeah. But we also have little appreciation for how much worse they would be if the church had not taken the gospel into every area of culture. All of Western civilization is essentially built on scripture and people who were committed to that and living it out publicly. Yeah. And the systems that built reduced poverty in a way that nothing else ever in human history has done. And so yes, there is one of history's lessons is that the gospel applied in a community can make life better, even for people who don't believe it. Even for people who don't believe it. This is legitimate mercy ministry.
Yes.
And what happens to a culture that is completely secular, that denies the existence of God, that believes that might makes right because people are all there is? We see, there's a lot of examples of what those places look like: Korea, China, North Korea, China, right? And they're terrible places.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things that history teaches us, but it also helps us to understand why life, broadly speaking, in the West is better than life in, the Congo and in Saudi Arabia. And it explains the ideas that inspired those things and why one is better than the other.
So good. Well, Joseph, we're so excited to have you a part of our biblical worldview curriculum we're putting out in 2024. It's going to be awesome. Thanks for being with us. Thanks for discussing all these important things. How do people find you and connect with Family Research Council?
Well, most of my stuff there is at frc.org/worldview. You can find me on Twitter or X, whatever we call it now, at Joseph Backholm. That's my name. And you can find me there.
Yeah, and we just so appreciate all your work on this and just being in the fight for so long, brother. It's just an honor to know you, and we're just thankful for you being a part of Christians Engaged in just a small way.
My pleasure.
Well, thank you guys for being with us this week. Every week we are here with Conversations with Christians Engaged, teaching on everything related to praying, voting, and engaging regularly, and also how to do that from a biblical worldview. It's time, church, for us to wake up and be the answer to every ill in society. Join us every week. Thank you so much for joining us for this incredible podcast. What a time we've had. We love you so much. We love being in your life. Have you subscribed? Have you shared this with your family and friends? Please subscribe on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, Rumble, wherever you get your audio or video pods. We need your help. This mission is undergirded by individuals just like you that support this ministry monthly, annually, and whenever you think about us, to be able to reach over 1 million Christians in the next 2 years. That's our goal. We want to empower 1 million Christians around America to pray, vote, and engage regularly. Will you help us? We're here to do that, and we need your help. I want to say thank you to our partners at The Stream. What an incredible online publication put out by James Robison and Life Outreach International, as we come together across denominational lines as believers to discern what God's saying about the news of the day and to hear from different viewpoints. Check out The Stream, make it your homepage, and get on their email list. This product is amazing. Also, our partners at Edify app, put out by Christian Post. This podcast app is a convergence of Bible teachers around America. We're excited to be a part of Edify app. Check out all their other podcasts. Thank you so much again for caring about this nation. We're here to help you pray, vote, and engage. We'll see you next week.